Hey everybody, I'm JJ. We're going to be talking about hardening and locking Wi-Fi down. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff, and I'm going to move relatively quickly. I do have lots of resources kind of hidden, and not hidden, but like in the slides, so you guys can come back and watch this later when it's posted on YouTube. Definitely hashtag not a CWNE. So I'm in Team UC where that scares me. I like even the CWNA. I've read 3 of the books. But definitely, like, nope, that's not happening. I did do the SP. So I work primarily in security, but done wireless for a long time. Certifications and stuff. I do want to share, because I know Keith won't do this. I have a podcast called Packet Protector, where we do everything at the intersection of networking and security. Keith also has a podcast in the Packet Pushers Network that's heavy wireless. And I talked to several people last year here. And at some point, the conversation of, yeah, do you know about Keith's podcast? Heavy wireless, and then they were like, wait, this Keith? And I'm like, yeah, no, that's this Keith. So if you're not familiar with that, go check that out. 2 podcasts, lots of fun stuff there. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to everybody that was in our boot camp this week. We had so much fun. I mean, the whole boot camp scene here is fantastic, and it really makes this training accessible. But during that, one of the things we did was spin up a bunch of SSIDs on different equipment, and we started looking at Wi-Fi security, AKM, cipher suites, and we realized it got really tangly really quickly. And so while we were sitting down here earlier, I put together a cheat sheet and I posted it on LinkedIn. So there's a QR code, but you can also just go to LinkedIn and find it. And I hope that helps, and if you see something wrong, please let me know. The other thing is I have a book out that's the wireless security architecture book with Wiley that's down in the corner there, the pretty one with all like the purple and the blue and the green. But there are fantastic books that have come out recently. So Jerome has, and other authors, right, that I'm not as familiar with. The Wi-Fi 7 book, Adrian and crew with Wi-Fi Explorer Pro book, and Mr. Lee Badman, the author himself, coming out with Wi-Fi 25. So definitely check those things out. So let's talk a little bit about why I care about wireless security and why I'm trying to compel you guys to care about this as well. Something like 60% of the breaches that we have are due to just unpatched infrastructure, like super 101 level things. I know we all like all of the hacker ninja like pen testy things, but the reality is like we're just not doing the basic stuff right still. I come every year, I talk about that. That's the only thing I'm going to say about that this year. But we did have something interesting happen a few months ago. And if you guys follow any of the security news, you might have heard about the nearest neighbor attack. Did anybody hear about this? All right, a few yeses, everybody else? Yes. Okay, thank you to the one guy over here that heard about it. So in short, what happened was Russian actors in Russia were able to compromise one organization through VPN credentials. So they used a VPN, right, remote access. They got inside of that organization. And then twice, what they did was they used scraped credentials from the internet, right, because our credentials are for sale everywhere on the dark web. And they hopped from the network that they got into with the VPN using Wi-Fi credentials for the organization next door. Because we don't require multi-factor for Wi-Fi access. So obviously this is a username password, MS Chat v2 kind of situation here. That was still one hop away from the target organization they were trying to reach, so they did the exact same thing. They scraped credentials for that organization. They hopped from this network to that, using Wi-Fi credentials, and that was called the nearest neighbor attack. Now, this got found out because this third entity that was ultimately the target was doing some other things security-related. They had a partner in this space that was evaluating some weirdnesses that they saw going on deep within the network in one of their application and servers, and that was how they eventually reverse engineered that this is what this happened. So we're starting to see, I think, Wi-Fi has not been the low-hanging fruit because we had a lot of other things, a lot of other exploits. Now that we're moving systems, especially internet-facing, to multi-factor, we're starting to see people figure out new ways to attack Wi-Fi. And of course, with all of the IoT stuff going on, that's just going to explode even more. So there's 3 areas I wanted to touch on here today about locking down your Wi-Fi, and I do have some resources in here for you guys if you want to dig a little deeper. This is a 20-minute talk, so I'm going to cover quite a bit. The first is vulnerability management. And I feel passionately about vulnerability management as a security professional because this is how we identify whatever we think is critical or needs to be addressed, and we prioritize whatever that looks like, locking something down, hardening it, patching it, et cetera. But the challenge is, well, it's not so much a challenge. The fantastic thing is that we have all of this registry of critical vulnerabilities and exploits, the CVEs. The beautiful part about this is there's a lot of them. But it's okay because somebody who works in security will do that for you, and then they're really nice because they come to you and they hand you this like 30-page report that lists out all of the CVEs, and you can click through the details, and that's just for one IP address of like one of your controllers, right? Who's ever going to sift through 30-some pages per type of device on the network and then figure out which of these little vulnerabilities actually applies to my environment and what's the context? So the problem that we've been having is, first of all, the fact that somebody in a different organization of the business probably that doesn't have any clue how your stuff works is over here doing some scanning things without any context. They're working in a silo. They're not coordinating with you probably. And they're just dumping this long report that you're never going to make it through because you're already dealing with these other 50 tickets of something else going on. The other part of that is that we tend to ignore any of the vulnerabilities that have to do with infrastructure that's inside of our organization because the thought process is, well, we consider our network trusted, and you can't get to these things unless you're on our network, this network, some other network. But the reality is that's just not true, and it's not true for a lot of different reasons. We've seen pen testers pivoting from guest network portals into production environments on the management side. We have seen lack of or misconfigurations in segmentation. So there's definitely a flawed risk analysis when it comes to the idea that we don't need to patch and protect things like switches, routers, the insides of firewalls or internal firewalls, wireless controllers, and all of those devices. Then we do also have Wi-Fi stuff sometimes that's sitting and is externally facing, right? You might have remote APs, you might have remote sites doing things, and you might have tunnel terminators. So we end up with this giant list, and we have CVEs, and they give you nice little numbers. I will tell you this, just as a quick little side note. Don't pay attention to the numbers, even though they start with the year that they came out. Because sometimes the year that it actually was initiated with the researcher who reported the vulnerability is not even the year that it gets released in. So it's very possible you'll see something come out next month or in a few weeks that has a 2024 or even a 2023 numbering on it. So that doesn't mean it's old. So they score these things. They tell us if it's high, if it's medium, it's low. We get all of this other information. You might see something like this with the vulnerability analysis scan. This is back to that like lovely 30-page report you're going to get per IP address. And you have to sift through these. So this one's nice because it's got what, like 913 total vulnerabilities on that IP address. Let's pick one that has the least. Okay, so the one near the bottom only has 591. I might want to start with that one just so maybe I could get through it. And then for each one of those little reports, each one of those CVEs that are registered, what we have is this long thing of information from the vulnerability database. We probably have something from the vendor. We're going to have to click in and sift through that and understand, does it apply to us? Does it apply to our version? Does it apply to our use case and how this thing can be accessed or not? And it turns into just this giant, unreasonable and unmanageable mess. But there is. Do you want me to answer that for you? No. His head's down like this. No, you won't even make eye contact with me now. But there is one thing that we have that I really love, and we don't talk about it a lot. And that's that CISA, and please, I do hope that with all of the government changes, we still have CISA in a few weeks. CISA has something called the KEVs. And these are known exploited vulnerabilities. So if you don't live in the security world, and I'm throwing a bunch of letters at you, let me rewind it for a second. I was talking about CVEs a minute ago. Critical vulnerabilities and exploits. That's everything that could be exploited and all of the vulnerabilities that researchers have found in a particular product. A product could be a specific version of something. It could be, a supply chain issue where it's, the something that's running inside of the something because your platform uses some open source thing. Log4j was a great example. So that's all of the vulnerabilities. But the KEVs, the known exploited vulnerabilities, are one that we have found in the wild actively being exploited. So let me just ask you guys, if you have a list of all of these vulnerabilities, and you have a list of a few of them that are being exploited in the wild, which ones do you think we might want to look at first? So the KEVs are a great place to start, and there's some additional data that we can look at here. Oh, let me give you guys a little disclaimer that I feel is very important here. I don't sell anything other than me and my services. I do work with a lot of different vendors. This is an equal opportunity vendor. It's not a bashing, but show and tell. So you're going to see stuff from all of the Wi-Fi vendors in different ways in here. I am not picking on any of you. I tried to spread the love across all of them. I think this one happens to be, I can't read that from this angle with this thing on it. But we've got Ruckus, we've got Extreme, we've got Cisco, we've got Aruba, we've got Juniper. Everybody's in here. We love you all. So what you'll see in these KEVs is we have something like 7 weeks. If we have a known vulnerability, not something being actively exploited, you have about 7 weeks from the time the CVE comes out until the time we start to see bad actors scanning networks for that vulnerability. 7 weeks. But when something comes out into a KEV, it's 5 days. Which is why when you see these reports and these KEVs coming out from the vendors, what we really, really want you to do is to try to patch these things immediately, if not sooner, as my grandfather used to say. So we're talking about 24 hours, 48 hours. The window of opportunity here depends a little bit on how critical the system is. Context matters, how accessible it is, and then whether or not you're going to get fired if that thing didn't get patched. The other interesting statistic here and to look at is that the CVEs come by the thousands and sometimes tens of thousands in the course of a year, but the KEVs, the actual exploited vulnerabilities, are something like 3 to 4% of the total CVEs. So if we can just knock out of the gate, if we don't have time to do everything, and we can just erase 96 to 97% of the noise, we can really start to get laser focused on those few things that matter to us. The next thing I like to look at after we talk about the known exploited vulnerabilities in those KEVs is then we do start to look at the CVE scoring. And there's different scoring families, methods, frameworks. Some of them are standardized, and some of them are contextualized within your environment. So what I mean by that is there's always going to be something like a criticality rating with each of these CVEs that comes out. You might see it from the database. You might see it, in this case, I'm showing you a Cisco PCERT advisory. It's got a critical rating, a 10 out of 10 here. And it depends on where you're getting that information and who's doing that scoring as to which, what they're taking into account. Typically, though, it's just generally how easy is it and then how bad is it? How easy is this for somebody to do? And how much of a world of crap are we going to be in if this happens, in our environment? And you can start at the most critical things and just trickle your way through. You're never going to make it all the way through the list of CVEs. Because remember, you saw the example of that report where there's sometimes hundreds. And that's not rare. I didn't pull something off the wall just to prove a point here. But you're talking about dozens, scores, and hundreds per IP address to work on here. So the third part there is to keep going, because those CVEs don't expire. They continue to be a problem, and right now, as of today and this week, we're seeing a large volume of breaches and exploits that are leveraging CVEs that are more than 20 years old. More than 20 years old. So it's definitely important to keep up with these things. There are appropriate ways to leverage those vulnerability scans that we can get. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we get this information, what's the appropriate way to use it and ingest it, and tackle that. So the first thing is that you can do a manual review. That's definitely not fun. I have done this before for a few specific things that were sort of niche products out in the field. The other thing is that you can sign up for alerts from your vendor for their product security. Every vendor, I believe, has this in some form. They might push it in a feed, they might push it in an email. Most of the ones that I work with, I get emails from them. And I do actually, because we manage customer environments, right, I do actually look at them and read them as soon as they come in. You can subscribe to various feeds, various places, and then aggregate those in RSS. You can use vulnerability scanning tools. If you use them solo, you don't have a ton of context. So what I really like is integrating or automating some of these scans within the other security tooling and infrastructure such that you get the context, right? Because all vulnerabilities and all CVEs are not equal within your environment, because if this thing's externally facing or accessible from a shared or a public or a guest network, we probably care about it faster than we care about something internal. On the other hand, there are going to be some crown jewel networks where it's like, well, we don't think this is accessible, but we're in an industry where we might be targeted, and there are ways that somebody could get into this environment, and therefore we need to patch. So what some of this looks like here is we've got CVE details. I have a page with just links on these, so don't worry about it if you're curious where they come from. One of the things I did want to point out if you're subscribing or searching is these do get a little messy with some of the names. Aruba is a great one for me to pick on here because we had HP, we had HPE, it might be HP Enterprise. Here you see I search for Aruba. There's some that are listed under Aruba, there's some that are listed under Aruba Networks, and then there's a whole other one where somebody typed in Aruba Networks and there's no space in there. So just a word of caution, if you are going to go like search for things in one of the aggregate databases, be crafty when you're looking. Cisco is a pretty easy one. But sometimes, extreme networks without a space. So, do a little digging there. These are just some of the examples. There's one at HPE that you can subscribe and pick your products. Cisco has the same thing there for their product set. And then they do have things that are public facing. My last note about this is if you do want to use some of those vulnerability scanning tools, and I'm just gonna recognize, let me get a quick show of hands. How many of you are in an organization where somebody else does vulnerability scanning and then tells you to go fix things? That is absolutely most of you. Okay, the rest of you, do you do any vulnerability scanning yourself and remediate your own things? Is there anybody? You do vulnerability scanning yourself and remediate your own things, just only Alan? Okay. Do the rest of you not get any type of vulnerability data reports at all? Like this is just outside of what you have to deal with? A few hands around, yeah, okay. Fantastic, well, I'm about to make it your problem. Sorry. You do have opportunity to work with whoever's running those scans. I like to democratize security. Not silo it within different teams. So I love to see teams working together and be cross-functional when it comes to this. They don't know crap about your wireless infrastructure. And you probably don't know crap about the vulnerability scanning tools, but we can fix that. So one of the things that they do is you can actually do what's called like authenticated scans. You can work with them. They'll actually the tooling will log into the infrastructure. It has plugins that are already developed. It can run certain lookups and scripts so that they can actually get the right information from the inside instead of trying to tell what's going on from the outside. And speaking of what's going on from the outside, let's talk about this. There's one kind of PCERT notice that you're never going to get, and it looks like this. You're never going to get something from Cisco or Aruba or Extreme or any of the vendors that says you were a dumbass and you left management ports unsecured and your critical Wi-Fi devices. This is super, super critical. This is a 12 out of 10, and your workaround is to hire somebody competent to please manage these things for you. So what that means is that we have to take ownership. I feel strongly about this because do you guys have kids? Does anybody have kids that are adults? At least like in their 20s? Do they drive? Do you expect them to know how to put gas in the car? Maybe be able to like change a tire, plug a hole, oil changes. It's basic maintenance. The security pieces here are basic Maintenance. So in my last 45 seconds, I'm going to scoot through this really quickly and talk about some of the configuration management things to do. And I want to show you some Nmap scans, if I can make it that far. So the first thing is, if you have regulatory requirements, if you have thou shalt and demands, go do those first. The next thing is there's a ton of tiered guidance for security hardening. My book has a lot of stuff in it that's laid out in kind of this first tier, second tier, third tier, low, medium, high. The CIS controls cover a lot of these things. I'm going to talk about that in a second. When we talk about hardening, there's everything from just basic, like don't leave management ports unsecured, don't have default passwords. When we get into high security environments, so we're talking about secure the access point, because if somebody takes that thing down, can they get to the data port behind it? Can they manipulate and pull passwords or other data off of like the JTAG port that's designed inside of this for testing and development? So there's all kinds of hardening guidance from down here, baby steps, all the way up to here. And we'll walk you through, do these things first and do these things second or third. So if I can have 10 seconds, I'm going to click through these quickly. I do crap like this at the house, and it makes JD twitchy. So we have lab stuff that stays where it lives, and then I have things where I'm like, let me just do this quickly and run Nmap scans. You guys can look at these slides, but I thought it was kind of fun from a hardening perspective. I just took a bunch of stuff on the network. I revved things up and down in code and looked at different versions of stuff. These are some Aruba things. I attached things into Central. I clustered them. I did this. I did that. There's Extreme, there's Meraki in here, there's Juniper Mist in here, and we just kind of looked at what these things are doing by default. So here we go from 6 to 10, here we went from solo to a clustered AP group, here we went from AOS 8 to 10, here's all sorts of different things from different vendors. The Juniper Mist only ever do this one little SSH thing, so I never have any fun doing anything with their stuff. Sometimes it's complicated. So while I was running these scans, one of the things I noticed was that the external IP address of our firewall had... You guys see anything wrong with this? Port 80 is open. Like HTTP web traffic is open. And I'm like, what the ever-loving crap is this? I start digging around. I find out that somebody else in my house has set up our firewall to get automated certificate updates, which is actually pretty cool using the ACME protocol. So I'm like, all right, that's fine. I'm not going to red flag port 80 being open here. So, So the other parts of it's complicated when you're doing this is a lot of the products, again, I'm not picking on Aruba, this is kind of everywhere, they tend to default to unencrypted and unsecured protocols. Sometimes we think something is disabled, so in the UI here, there's no SSH, there's no telnet enabled, it still let me get a telnet SSH and a telnet shell to it. I have some resources that are free for you guys if you want to get in on it. NetAlly has some webinars we did on hardening that goes deeper into all the stuff I clicked through quickly here. There's a cheat sheet for Nmap scans with some regex, and if you have a cyberscope, there's all kinds of fun stuff to do with that. If you were sitting here going, JJ, I don't have to deal with this, I just do survey and design, you have a role in security, and it's a very important one. I created the security training for ECHAHAL. If you log into their training programs, you will see. I'm glad at least one person was excited, and that was probably Matt. So it's very in-depth and it's very customized. I actually get into all of the ECHAHAL solutions and walk you through what you need to be doing in security within the product. So that's out there for you guys. And the last thing I have to say about this is I want to reiterate that Stephen Orr is doing a security Q&A session tonight, 8:45. If you have questions, you can put them in the Slack and security. There's a QR code up here to a LinkedIn post, or you can just find me or message me or him. All right, guys, thank you so much.